Chapter 4, Star Student, Launching the American Dream. My mother taught us that the key to success in America is a good education. If there was one thing about Sonia, it was that she wasn't afraid to ask questions. She learned that from her mother. She had a natural curiosity, although some mistook it for disrespect. Even though she was one of the best students at Blessed Sacrament, the nuns were sometimes shocked by her willingness to ask questions. In those days, women weren't supposed to ask questions, especially of authority figures. Maybe that came from her mother, whose resourcefulness and work ethic burrowed into Sonia. She didn't take no for an answer, and she always sought solutions to a problem. Attending a Catholic school meant sacrifices for families like Sonia's, but her mother was determined, especially once her father died, to keep Sonia and Junior educated and on the straight and narrow. Sonia watched her mother struggle, working at a hospital and attending nursing school at the same time. Going back to school was a challenge in and of itself. Selina often lamented that the tests were too difficult and that she wouldn't pass them, and Sonia in return would lose patience with her and say if her mother stopped studying, then so could she and Junior. But somehow Selina always passed with flying colors. They actually ended up studying side by side. The set of Encyclopedia Britannica, which Selina saved and scrimped for, lit a fire in Sonia and Junior. They read the books constantly, devouring the material, learning intricate details about insects and countries, literature and history, philosophers and politicians. It was like a virtual movie theater at their fingertips. Anything they wanted to look up, they could. Some entries even had pictures. Sonia read everything she could get her hands on. The whole apartment complex was in awe. Books had been her escape from poverty and from pain, especially when her dad died. They shut out the noise, and what she found in books took her to lands far from her world. She said, "I understood there was more I could dream to do and see." The three books that meant the most to Sonia were the Bible, Shakespeare's complete works, and Don Quixote. The Bible inspired her to be the kind of person she wanted to be. Shakespeare offered insights into human nature, and Don Quixote reminded her of the spirit of the chase, of following your dreams. I do think there's a need to be idealistic. I would rather live a life being hopeful than not, dreaming rather than giving up, she said. The love of reading set her up for success at her schools. Catholic schools versus public schools. Sonia's family, like many other working-class Puerto Rican families in the Bronx, saw public schools as too rowdy and dangerous. Since the Sotomayors were Catholic, Selina and Juan had worked several jobs to pay the tuition for Sonia and Junior at the Blessed Sacrament Elementary School and Cardinal Spellman High School in the Northeast Bronx. Founded in 1929, Blessed Sacrament was so close to the Bronxdale houses that the brick building complex could be seen from the school's playground. Older students attended school in upstairs classrooms inside Blessed Sacrament Church. Younger ones had classes in a building behind it. Fewer than 300 students attended during the regular academic year. Of those, the majority were Hispanic. Girls outnumbered boys. Once the neighborhood was mostly middle class, but over time graffiti slashed across the walls of nearby homes and storefronts. This indicated that the neighborhood might not be as safe as it once was. Some graffiti is made by gangs and taggers to mark their territory, with specific paint symbols, scrawls, and words. This kind of tagging can lead to confrontations and violence. Often, tough economic times can lead to desperation. If there's a lack of jobs and opportunities, drugs and crime can settle into once sought-out neighborhoods. For Sonia's childhood, she was relatively safe if she stayed within her neighborhood. Sonia attended Blessed Sacrament in the 1960s, from kindergarten through 8th grade, with 40 to 50 students in each grade. Up until 5th grade, Sonia was a C student. Then the nuns started giving out gold stars, and her competitive nature emerged. She studied hard, but when she couldn't get it, she asked a superstar classmate who earned many gold stars how she studied. Sonia wanted to earn those gold stars too, and set off on a mission to do so. Even though she loved school, the rule-bound nature of a Catholic education pitted her curiosity and natural tendency to ask questions, too many questions sometimes, against authority. Even in 3rd grade, she dreaded being disciplined by the black-robed Sisters of Charity, who would take her to the principal's office or punish her in other ways. Discipline was virtually an 8th sacrament, said Sonia. Trouble seemed to find her. Sometimes she asked questions that shouldn't be asked. Other times she seemed to cause offense by simply trying to puzzle things out. Once, when the nuns at her school told her to finish eating a piece of rye bread on her plate, she told them she didn't want to. They told her there were starving children in India. Sonia told them, well, mail it to them. Hauled up to the front of the cafeteria, she was slapped. Everyone saw me get punished for the smart mouth that I had, she said. Sonia was also occasionally sent to the principal's office for saying things out of turn. Her mother would have to pick her up there. What Sonia learned that day in the cafeteria when she was punished in front of everyone was a lesson in humility. She learned that there were always people more needy than herself, and that she had an obligation to think of them. Over time, she came to believe that God was good, and his intent was to help human beings become better people. Catholic school taught her that sometimes there is a need to follow strict rules and that authority matters. Discipline guided Sonia, and compassion for others took root in her heart and mind. In 1968, with a near-perfect attendance record, Sonia graduated at the top of her class. Cardinal Spellman High School. In high school, her thirst for knowledge expanded, and she found herself attending Cardinal Spellman Catholic High School, founded in 1959, which had earned a reputation as a school for high achievers. She was in the right place. In school, she focused on social issues, turning the spotlight on the plight of others. She stood up for what was right and questioned when something was wrong. It helped that her best friends were bright and challenged her. Other students were also drawn to her, perhaps because Sonia was very good at listening. She would find friends confiding in her and seeking out her advice, and many of those personal conversations took place at Sonia's home. Her mom would cook while Sonia and her friends discussed issues of the day, like protests over the Vietnam War or difficulties with homework in math class. Ken Moy, one of her best friends, had a dad who was a gambler with drug problems and a violent temper. Studying gave him an escape from his troubled home. They studied philosophy and belonged to many clubs together. In addition to being a close friend, Ken was also the student coach who helped Forensic Club students with debate and speech. Forensics Club at Cardinal Spellman was good training for a career in law. Sonia has described the 12 girl members as self-selected, high-functioning nerds. The club followed a pre-professional program that trained members in public speaking and debate skills. Each team member was handed a topic and had to argue a pro or con side without emotional attachment, although the goal was to elicit emotion from the audience. It didn't matter what the member believed about the issue she was assigned. What mattered was how well she could make her case. To prevail, a team member had to be able to argue both sides, to listen well, and to think like the opposition too. I was amazed that something so mathematically pure and abstract could transform into human persuasion, into words with the power to change people's minds, said Sonia. Ken served as their student mentor, and she thought him brilliant until he told her not to talk with her hands. She was astounded by this. Tell a Puerto Rican not to talk with her hands? Ask a bird not to fly. Sonia enjoyed exploring and testing ideas and was inspired by the atmosphere of thoughtful, stimulating conversation and heated debate. One time she had to debate with an animated girl who spouted Marxist theory. At one point, Sonia sensed her opponent getting annoyed. When time was up, Sonia asked her why she turned so angry. The girl felt Sonia didn't take a stand. Everything depends on context with you. If you're always open to persuasion, how can they tell if you're friend or foe? The problem with people like you is that you have no principles." The accusation took Sonia by surprise, but in reality the interchange made her look inward. She actually did have a solid belief system. Basically, she believed that sometimes a responsible person has to think about all sides of a situation, really assess the facts, and take into consideration circumstances that affect individuals and their decisions. She never wanted to assume things about individuals or stereotype them, but there had to be some inner principle that drives them to make choices. The core lesson for Sonia never wavered, however, and that interaction convinced her that a person without principles is also necessarily a person who, in her words, has no moral core. The Doubters. In the 1970s, the women's movement and civil rights movement challenged authority and stereotypes. Affirmative action gave people of color a chance to get access to higher education and better employment opportunities. For Sonia, this meant a better chance of going to college. People of authority, teachers for example, questioned her knowledge and drive. One of the nuns at Blessed Sacrament wrote in her yearbook that Sonia aspired to be both a lawyer and a mother, and questioned whether she would be able to do both. It was as if she had to prove herself twice every time, over and over, when people doubted her for not having what it took to be at the top of her class, especially as a Latina. Her high school math teacher couldn't believe that she was able to pass the test with such a high score. Sonia was asked to retake the exam. She did. Sonia almost took it as a matter of course that she would have to retake tests because those in authority doubted her. But she didn't doubt herself or her capabilities. She didn't really mind that she had to be put to the test over and over again. When she retook the math test in question, she again found herself at the top of her class, with higher scores than her white counterparts. This would not be the only time she was asked to take tests over, and it would not be the only time she proved people wrong. She was once asked how she could score higher than the Caucasian students who applied to the Ivy League schools. Sonia shrugged. "I do know one thing about me," she later said. "I don't measure myself by others' expectations or let others define my worth." But it seemed she was viewed as something of a threat to people who didn't know her. Many people perceived her as less than, less important or valuable because of the color of her skin, or because she was a woman, or because she was poor, or because of where she came from. Every chance she could, Sonia corrected them. "That's not who I am," she would say. Her pride didn't waver. That pride extended beyond academics. Dating her high school sweetheart, Kevin Noonan, was almost like being put to another test. Inseparable after their first date in Manhattan, they became best of friends, enjoying each other's company while challenging each other academically. Because she was Puerto Rican, his mother did not like her. As time passed, they grew more comfortable with each other. Sonia's mother saw Kevin as another son. The unspoken rule for many Catholic families, that you married your high school sweetheart, seemed to be in effect here, despite the fact that Kevin's mother wasn't especially fond of Sonia. The question was whether they would marry right after high school or after college. They waited. Being a student at Cardinal Spellman pushed her to standards of academic excellence and also to spiritual awakening, giving her moral values and a basic sense of right and wrong. She also believed that being raised Catholic taught her compassion. "I think being a Catholic made me a better person. It taught me how to choose good over evil and how to be a more caring human being." Sonia graduated from Cardinal Spellman High School as valedictorian of the class of 1972. She learned to really listen to what people had to say, to understand and argue both sides of an argument. She tried her luck at persuading others, which would help her in her life as an attorney. She was a student activist and in student government. All were good traits that would later help her on her path toward being a judge. Outside of school, Sonia was inspired to stay on her path in other ways. When Senator Robert Kennedy came to the Bronx, she was moved by his words for social justice and civil rights. When he was later killed, Sonia decided to follow in his footsteps and made a vow to continue his mission. Heading into the unknown, almost unbelievable world of Ivy League colleges could have been a frightening experience, a different world from anything she'd ever known or imagined, but she was on a mission. Social justice would guide her.